Ja, guten Tag. Mein Name ist Bernd Arnold. Ich bin Fotograf aus Köln. Viele werden mich hier jetzt nicht verstehen, da ich in deutscher Sprache vortrage. Doch da es auch um KI geht, ist es angebracht, das Ganze jetzt mit meiner Stimme synchron in Englisch vorzutragen. Hello, many more people will understand me now, since my voice is now being translated simultaneously by AI. I think that's a good idea because my message is now reaching more people. And that brings us to the topic. It's about technologies, specifically photography and AI-generated imitation of photography. But first, I'll give a brief overview of my work. I have been working in the medium of photography since 1983. After my photography studies, my career took me to work nationally and internationally for magazines and newspapers in corporate photography, as well as on books and exhibitions. I summarize my most important works in cycles such as Power and Ritual, Portrait Series, or in the digital cycle. My observations focus on people. One series is Power and Ritual. It's about performances and rituals from different areas, from religion, politics, business, television, and the life of the demi-monde. Each series is quite extensive, like the election campaign ritual, which covers the 11 federal election campaigns I photographed from 1987 to 2015. They went into a photo book or were published in magazines, and pictures from it end up in exhibitions. And furthermore, I then work with my experience in corporate photography. You could say my working age is 40 years. And the crazy thing is that's exactly the transition from the analog into the digital age. The change of photography, images, and visual worlds runs parallel to the technological development of photographic processes. There we come right to the question, what is the essential property of photography and that of AI-generated images? To be able to answer this question, let's go on a journey through the history of perception in relation to photography. So let's start in an Argentinian cave. There, about 11,000 years ago, still heavily hairy male and female authors immortalized their hands. No? One could say that in principle, a photographic process was used here. Instead of light, color pigments were used, and they are imprints of a past reality. Similar things can be found in plaster casts of people who were victims of a pyroclastic catastrophe, trapped in Roman Pompeii 2000 years ago, and later excavated by filling the cavities with plaster. These are now to be seen today in their last moments. And these plaster figures are in a certain way reminiscent of war reports, photo reports from wars, as in crisis areas. They are imprints of a past reality. Here we see a photogram. Glasses and a light bulb were placed on photographic paper and covered with light. When exposed to light and then developed, the overexposed areas on the paper turn black. That is also an imprint of a past reality. In principle, the imprint of the hands does not differ from that of the glasses. One is created with pigments and the other with light. Both are imprints of a past reality that we can see today. The same applies to the light trail that was recorded with analog cameras. Here we see pictures from 1998, Gerhard Schröder in the election campaign as a negative and as a positive. The light trace is an imprint. Photography is an imprint of a past reality. The core of analog photography is the captured light. Yes, how could the need for photography even arise? It is not a matter of course, because 200 years ago, it was not born out of nothing, but there was a long lead up, and something had to change so that photography as a process would become interesting at all. The perception of reality had to change. The camera obscura was already known in antiquity, but a true to life representation of reality was still a long way off. In the Middle Ages, people were still depicted in the importance perspective. Important event carriers like kings were depicted large, while the lower ranks were shown small and pushed to the side. The center in the Christian cosmos was God. His heavenly kingdom ruled over the fate of mankind. The imagery of the Middle Ages was also a worldview. They were not images of a perceptible reality, they were fictions. The most important perspective was a combination of faith and doctrine. It was only in the 15th century that one began to want to grasp reality, and there was a different, newly grasping world. This began with the discovery of the central perspective by the artist-engineer Filippo Brunelleschi in the year 1425. He introduced a three-dimensional, mathematically constructed space into painting with which one could actually create a three-dimensional illusion in painting. One of the first pictures you see here, and the contemporary Antonio Manetti described the effect of Brunelleschi's pictures, saying, when one looks at the painting in this way, it seemed as if what one saw was reality itself. In this picture you see here, the size ratios are already quite different. The faces seem to be real. They are probably personalities from this time. And that is in a stark contrast to what was there before, because it was more like pictograms back then. If you look at painting, then in the year 1500, you can see a picture by Giovanni Bellini, who painted a Doge. And here it shows that painting becomes a tool for depicting perceptible reality. That means he has really tried to represent things realistically. Here you can see the picture again in color. I have changed it to black and white because in essence it becomes more realistic as one can compare it with photography. And here you can see another picture from the perspective of meaning with 200 or 300 years between them. You can see what an enormous development human perception of reality has undergone, but also what great changes in the worldview must have taken place. Once again, a picture that shows my uncle, whom I had portrayed in 1989. And on the right is a saint painted by Ribera. You can also see here that it is essentially about reality. Even if the saint is an ideal figure, the painters back then did indeed use real people as models. But the decisive thing about this picture is that both fundamentally convey a past reality. A further aspect which emerged alongside the central perspective in the 15th century was Johannes Gutenberg, who invented printing with movable type at around the same time in 1450. This made it possible to spread knowledge on a mass scale. The typeface shows differences between the human and the mechanical. The transition is also comparable from the typewriter to the laser printer, or perhaps even to the transition from human-created texts to texts by artificial intelligence. Because with handwriting, you can still draw conclusions about the painter. You can say that was Mr. Müller. With the mechanical on the right side, that is no longer traceable. And so this transition from human to mechanical is also always a loss of the individual. So you can say that with the discovery of the central perspective and the invention of the printing press, possibilities for a boundless science opened up, which brought about a significant expansion of the perception of reality. Both technologies, one in the visual and the other in the linguistic field, together resulted in a revolution in communication. This created the conditions for a change in the perception of reality, which revealed this need for a discovery of photography. For God had to step aside to clear the view on reality. So it was only logical to create a process that was even more precise, as one of the inventors of photography, Henry Fox Talbot, wrote in 1839. For travelers to foreign countries who, as is often the case, cannot draw. This small invention could be quite useful, even for artists, no matter how skilled they may be. He says two things. Everyone would like to take a memory with them. And secondly, when it comes to being true to nature, artists can paint so skillfully they simply cannot photograph. And here we see the first photograph. The beginning of every new use of technology is imperfect, as you can see here. The inventor photographed his backyard in 1826 with an exposure time of several hours from his study. It can be stated that photography was not a break with painting, but its continuation with a much better and faster technology. Photography takes on the role of reality. The photographs dominate the visual world for the next 200 years. One is not aware, but most of the photography that we have seen on television and in newspapers and have incorporated as part of our life world, we have never encountered in reality. The French philosopher and semiotician Roland Barthes focused the core of photography on the necessary real thing that was placed in front of the lens and without which there would be no photography. He stated that photography is an unshakable connection between reality and the event. He condenses the essence of photography into "it has been." The sketched light trail exists independently of the photographer's subjectivity or their interpretation. The trace does not change apart from the process of aging, but the perception of it does. Photography is only ever possible in a movement, in an encounter with reality. It was before digitalization. But what differentiates analog from digital photography? Up to the moment of photographing the object, both processes do not differ. The cameras are in their principle similar to a camera obscura since antiquity. The change, however, concerns the image carrier. The traces of light developed on the analog image carrier are captured without displacement and can be seen with your own senses without any aid. A manipulation is extremely complex and easy to see. On the digital image carrier, the light trails must be deconstructed in order to be saved. It is virtual and must be reconstructed to be made visible again. The trail can be manipulated quickly at any time, and its verification is extremely complex. The trail could have been or not. Digital photography paved the way for synthetic images. Yes, there is a popular argument against the authenticity of photography. Manipulation has always existed. Yes, it's true. But one can certainly say that 99% of the photographs in circulation were not manipulated by replacing image parts or whatever. But a good example of manipulation are Stalin's retouches. The decisive point is that the mass of analog photographs that were in everyday use were not usually manipulated. The material light trail itself was authentic, but how it was intended and interpreted is a completely different matter. One cannot mix these two things. One must separate them from each other to understand what the traces mean in photography. Analog photomontages existed already with the invention of photography and were used in many ways. They were usually easy to see through as they were technically imperfect. Nevertheless, all elements were from reality. This also applies later to digital photomontages and stagings in front of the camera. They are things that actually existed. Yes, here Lenin is speaking on the stage, and Stalin's opponent, Leo Trotsky, is standing at the entrance to the podium. In the second picture, Leo Trotsky is missing. He has been deleted. So here you can see the difference again. This is indeed manipulation, but it is also an opportunity that is much easier later on in the digital realm. Let's move on to digital. Here is a picture from 1956. No technology comes from nothing. Today's technology has precursors. I'm just going to take out a single aspect here, which refers to the components of a digital camera, the printer, screen, and bandwidth distribution. In 1956, IBM presented the first hard drive in the world. It was introduced as a new compact IBM computer. What you see here is not the whole computer, but 4 workers loading the hard drive into a truck as storage for the computer. This storage was about 3.75 megabytes. That's enough for a single printable high-resolution photograph, for example, of a penguin. How many trucks would one need to store my image archive, which encompasses around 10 terabytes? What energy would be necessary to operate this? And above all, where do you park the trucks with the hard drives? This shows what technology development had to take place in advance to photograph thousands of pictures with a smartphone, save them, and send them further in real time. I'm going to skip ahead here. 1985, that was the time when I was studying photography. Still in 1985, it was unthinkable that photography in my lifetime could be replaced by something else. So that was unthinkable. But just 1 year later, in 1986, at the Cologne trade fair Photokina, I surprisingly encountered the new technology that would usher in a new age for professional photographers. Canon was advertising its new video system, which featured a sensational immediate reproduction of images, the elimination of chemical development processes, the sending of images over the phone, and the direct printing of paper images. That meant a revolution in professional photography. That was 40 years ago. This development prompted me in 1988 to speculate in an essay about a future photographer who no longer had to be on site but creates his pictures synthetically via image databases. At the time, I noticed that the transition from analog to digital image carriers would have a significant impact on the authenticity of a photograph. And so it was. In the time from the beginning of 2000 to 2005, the change came within the shortest time. Between 2002 and 2005, almost all professional photographers switched to digital photography. It went lightning fast. From 2019, I took up the idea of the new photographer that I had developed in 1988 again, and created photographs of political events in which I overlaid several time levels. Here you see pictures from the series That's How I Saw It from the federal election campaign of 2021. In the eponymous essay, I wrote about the transition from analog to digital photography, where the way is paved for the synthetic imitation of photography. In this picture, you see a speaker passionately presenting his political content. No one is listening. That can't be right. Here you see an audience totally captivated by nothing. That can't be right. Here you see a politician whose face is already incorporated into the monument in the background. It can't be right. And here you see Olaf Scholz, who is speaking alone on the stage. The guests of honor have not appeared. From 2022, the new visual phenomenon of AI-generated imitation of photography spread slowly in the media channels. They were made completely synthetically. This means politicians and photographers no longer have to go to the scene of the event, but the event can be conveniently generated synthetically at the desk with a cup of coffee. That's revolutionary. It didn't exist before. In 2023, I then had the possibility to accompany the Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz on his election campaign tour in the year 2025. I was very happy that was allowed. I thought it was sensational. I was thus able to create future events as an imitation of photography. Here you see Olaf Scholz, how I took a picture of him in the backroom of power as a portrait. Here you see him on his election campaign tour. Everything is artificially generated. There is nothing real. Not a single pixel is taken from reality. But in the course of the last 2 years, the pictures went through a strange metamorphosis. In the year 2023, the pictures show the future as it could be. During the election campaign of 2025, they were part of the present. I could have sent the pictures as current news pictures to the newspaper. And now the pictures are part of the past. They show seemingly historical events. In AI pictures, future, present, and past exist simultaneously, similar to simultaneous translation, which is generated and sent in many languages at the same time. We know what is depicted today, but will generations later still recognize what is to be seen here? Did there really exist in the 1920s men with smartphones who stood on the street and checked who had called? This blurring of reality and fiction caused by AI image generators marks a turning point for human senses. Image databases and media channels will be filled with millions of such images. No? I then just for fun checked if others also gave the same instruction. Men with smartphone around 1920 on streets. Yes, there are hundreds of them. Many others have already done it. And you can say that since 2022, around 15 billion pictures have already been generated. The imitation of photography and its mass distribution have consequences for our perception of reality. The relation in the perception of reality, depicted reality, and an AI-generated reality shifts. You can state that it's not the sensational pictures that undermine trust, but the pictures that appear as everyday familiar photographs, but imitate photography, modulate reality, and are spread millionfold in the usual channels over the years. So what is the essential difference between AI-generated pictures and photographs? You probably have some idea about it. What are we looking at here? It is a portrait of a woman, but in the sense of a photograph, nothing is depicted here. It is not an image of a reality. It has never been. It has never existed. It is the imitation of a photography. What you see here is a dichography. This term, which I introduced in 2021, stands for a parallel universe of images that is not made by human hands. Dichographies, in their perfection and mass distribution, are a new visual phenomenon in our perception of reality. The revolutionary thing about dichography is that all genres of photography that have ever existed, exist, or would have existed, can be simply lightning fast and perfectly imitated. The many existing techniques and work processes that have arisen in image production over time can be generated from a single tool without ever having encountered any reality. I find that quite remarkable. An essential question for the future will be, when it comes to documentation, whether something is documentation or fiction, what is still a photograph? When does it already become a dichography? Here we see three pictures. What is photography? What is dichography? The one on the far right is a photograph. The other two pictures of Angela Merkel are imitations of one. In summary, one can state that documentary photography will increase in relevance because its strength is it has been. Digital composition of reality will be the world of new images. Its strength is that it doesn't have to have been. When you consider the extent to which photography has expanded the perception of reality for one's own everyday life over 200 years, it becomes clear that we are entering a new visual world and we do not have the slightest idea what kind of pictures will emerge in the next 200 years. But one thing is certain, the AI-generated pictures and texts together result in a revolution in communication, one in the visual, the other in the linguistic area. The perception of reality will fundamentally change. Thank you for listening.